Some people say that having an ego death is not possible. But I say it is possible. Because if you take your time and sit down and watch the activity of your thoughts, and and in doing that, it is important that you see that the activity of thinking is something that is happening by itself. So there is just a silent awareness that is effortlessly watching the activity of thought that is happening automatically. By doing that, by seeing that, you realize that the ego doesn't have any real substance. And recognizing this fact is already the death of the ego. Because saying that there's a real ego means that there's an ego that has a real substance. Recognizing that the activity that we call ego has no real substance is not just an ego death, but it's the recognition that it was never really alive. So you're watching you're watching a happening, a pattern. You're looking at a pattern that is talking. It's talking. It's just an echo of the past. The brain has been conditioned to refer to itself as I. So therefore you hear a voice in your head that says, I am this, I am that, and it relates to others. And you're watching this voice. You're not trying to suppress it by becoming present so that the mind becomes still. But you're just watching your ego as it's doing what it wants to do right now in this moment. So then you see that actually there's no real I, but it's just a conditioned idea that has no real substance. The problem is just that when awareness is not aware of that pattern, then the ego seems to become a real thing. So the ego is basically just the unobserved pattern of thinking. As soon as there is observational thinking, there's no ego anymore. At least there is a shadow of what we can call ego, but it's not really an ego. And by becoming aware of this pattern, and by staying in as awareness, looking at the pattern without trying to do anything with the pattern and just allowing the thought to come to a natural end, when you're doing this, then you are releasing everything that is attached to the word I mean the ego I. So every emotional blockage that you're having, every pattern that is attached or habit that is attached to the ego will naturally come to an end without having to have any willpower that we normally have to have in order to end a certain habit or to begin a healthy habit. It naturally fades into nothingness because we see that there is no real ego that could die in the first place, but we just simply see that it was never really alive. And by looking at it from this perspective, looking from awareness at this shadow called ego, it loses its power, and everything that is attached to it just simply goes away. And the most important thing is that the sense of control, the sense of being the doer, being the decider, being the thinker, being the one who's just living, the one that's carrying the burden of having to be alive and going through life and having to carry responsibilities, the controller. That sense completely goes away because it's based on a completely illusory assumption. The sense of being the controller falls away. Because the sense of being the controller came when your mind, or when this I that consists of conditioning started to believe that there is a thinker that is separate from thoughts. So there's not just thinking happening like a process, just like digestion, there's a think you start the thinking started to believe that there is a thinker separate to the thinking. It's just like when you start, imagine you would start to believe that there is a digester separate from digesting. It would cause problems, and it would also also cause confusion. It's just that you start to observe the activity of the mind. And when you're doing it, then it's just the activity of the mind. It's no longer called ego. It's just looking at the pattern of thinking. So there's just observation from the point of view of pure awareness, which is not ego, looking at thought, which is also not ego. So there, in your actions, there won't be a sense of being the controller. So it's just happening, free and effortlessly. And that's when the so-called divine can finally act through you. Because first you start to get a sense of being free, and also getting a sense of emptiness, not being emotionally dead, but being free from all burdens. And that's freeing, that's emptying everything. You're no longer a container for all that crap that came with believing that you're an ego. So you're empty. And also you're no longer carrying the burden of being responsible for your actions, for your thoughts, for your emotions, having to heal them, having to heal your past, having to heal your shadow side, and all that. But you're simply becoming aware of everything. And by becoming aware of, your inner child, your shadow aspects, your ego and your tendencies, and you're already looking from the perspective of the divine. And that divine, the thing that I call divine, is not doing. It's just completely without effort, spontaneously acting, and it will feel right. There's no decision between right and wrong. It's just decision. And also, when you come in contact with other beings, and not just beings like human beings or animals, but also, objects. Basically, every form that you come in contact with, you see that it's also not just here because it has decided to be here, but because it's the one intelligence that's just right here, right now, because it's just where it wants to be right here and right now. Especially in things that don't have the ability to even cultivate the illusion of having an ego or being identified with this identity that is created by the conditioning, the psychological self, the separate self. That it's really the separate self consists only of things that the brain has learned. And you can disagree or agree to this, but really just a better thing to do would be to just sit down and don't listen to music or something. Just be here and wait until the first thought appears, and then look at it. Don't try to use any method to get rid of that thought or try to fight that thought, but just simply watch the thought. And even if it takes long, even if it's like music that is playing in your mind, which is something that happens often in this brain, follow the thought to its very end and see when the thought comes to an end. Keep looking effortlessly, and at some point the next thought will arise, and just keep doing this. And you will recognize that actually the ego is just a pattern that has no real substance. It is based on conditioning. It is not a real soul, it is not a real I, it is not a real self. The real self is quiet and it's intelligent. It can make decisions without thinking about them.